Welcome to Fish University, your one-stop shop for the science behind fish management. It is part of the Natural Resources University Podcast Network. I'm Wes Neal, your host. I'm an extension professor of fisheries and a researcher for Mississippi State University. Join me as I talk to researchers, managers, and landowners about the tools and science and the tricks of the trade for managing fish, water, and habitat. The goal is for you to have better fishing and a healthier aquatic ecosystem. So grab a notebook and the beverage of your choice and relax and enjoy Fish University. Welcome to Fish University. We spent several episodes talking about trout fisheries in Arkansas, particularly the Little Red River and its brown trout. Indeed, the natural state's trout fisheries are renowned, once boasting the world record brown trout. From the Little Red to the famous White River, people come from all around to target rainbow, brook trout, brown, and cutthroat trout in the cold and clear waters. Unfortunately, this past summer was a bad year for Arkansas's trout hatcheries and, by association, the trout fishing in the state. Because of this, the Arkansas Game and Fish Commission has implemented rather severe emergency trout regulations on most or all of the tailwater fisheries. To discuss what happened at the hatcheries, what it means for the rivers, and the long-term implications, my guest today is Christy Graham, the trout biologist for Arkansas Game and Fish Commission. Christy, how are you doing today?
I'm doing good. Thanks for having me today.
Too bad it's under these circumstances. What's the weather up there like right now? Is it pretty cold?
It's nice and cool this morning.
It's starting to cool down. I guess we're recording this in November. Arkansas in November, I know it could be 80 and it could be 40, and it just sort of depends on the day.
I think we started out mid-30s this morning.
Well, I always like to have my first-time guests give a little bit of background about how they got into fisheries and their path to their current roles. So tell me about yourself.
Yeah, so I've been with Arkansas Game and Fish a little over 16 years now. My path came up through Kansas. I'm a Kansas girl originally. I did my undergrad at Kansas State. I got my introduction to trout working with Dan Magulick at University of Arkansas Co-op unit, where I worked as a research technician on 2 big trout projects for a few years. Then I went over to Tennessee Tech and did my master's under Phil Batoli, and I've been with Arkansas Game and Fish ever since. So that's kind of my path up through the system and how I started with the trout program when I started with Game and Fish and started out as one of the 2 assistants. The other assistant was one of your former grad students. And then I did that for about 5 years and then became the program coordinator about...
Jeff Williams?
Yep, Jeff Williams was program coordinator when I started.
So you did a degree with Phil Batoli. Were you one of his final students before he retired?
He still had another probably 10 after I left.
Oh, okay.
I can't remember what number I was, 40-something, and I think he maybe ended up in the high 50s or 60.
I was almost a Phil Batoli student. He actually came up to Virginia Tech when I was an undergraduate and met with me. I don't remember why it didn't work out. Oh, I think I ended up taking my position at North Carolina, and I told him that, I would hope to do a PhD with him, and that's when he told me that Tennessee Tech didn't have a PhD program, so never quite worked out.
Yeah.
But I always liked Phil Batoli. I hope he's enjoying retirement now.
It sounds like he is. I haven't talked to him for quite a while.
Okay. So you told us about your background. We've talked about the Arkansas River trout fisheries quite a bit with Dr. Steve Lockman, particularly the Little Red River. We focused on the natural reproducing brown trout population in the Little Red. But Arkansas's got quite a diversity of trout waters that are tailrace fisheries. Why don't you tell us a little bit about the systems that you manage and how they're managed and anything else you want to tell us?
Yeah, so we're a statewide program. We manage all the trout fisheries in the state. The only ones that my program is not responsible for would be the family and community ponds where we stock trout during the winter months. But altogether, we have pretty close to 50 locations that are stocked with trout in Arkansas each year. Of course, the majority of those are those family and community ponds, but we have what we consider the year-round tailwaters, which are our major trout fisheries in the state. So that's the White River, Little Red River, North Fork tailwater, Beaver tailwater in northwest Arkansas, and then, of course, Spring River. So we stock all 5 of those throughout the year. And then we have seasonal trout fisheries in southwest Arkansas, so Little Missouri River, and then 3 tailwater fisheries on the Washita River as well. We have management plans that we develop for each of the major trout fisheries that are based on not only a blend of the science and data that we've collected, but also the public input that goes into managing the fisheries.
Those southwest fisheries, are they below, is that the one below Lake Catherine, or?
Yeah, so the Little Missouri River is below Lake Greason.
Okay.
It is Narrows Dam, Narrows tailwater. And then we have Lakes Hamilton, Catherine, and of course Washita. And so Blakely tailwaters below Lake Washita. And then we've got Carpenter tailwater, which is downstream of Lake Hamilton, and then the Remmel tailwater below Lake Catherine.
And those are seasonal, so I guess you stock them starting in the fall and
we usually start stocking them in early December, and then we'll stock them 3 or 4 months throughout the winter months.
When do water temperatures get too hot in those systems?
Usually starting to get into mid-March is when the water temperatures are getting a little on the warm side. That's why we don't really stock those. Narrows will stock a little bit longer. Usually the stockings will go into May, but the Washita River warms up a little sooner than that.
Okay. And we mentioned stocking. So stocking means fish come from somewhere. Tell us about your hatchery programs.
Yeah. So, this current situation highlights just how important our partnerships are with our hatcheries in Arkansas. We have 2 game and fish facilities, one of which is the Spring River State Fish Hatchery. It is the biggest facility that we have. We also have a net pen facility, which is used during the winter months, where we'll take fish from the federal hatcheries and they grow them out to help us stock those southwest Arkansas fisheries. But we rely very heavily on our partnership with the Fish and Wildlife Service, and they've got 3 hatcheries in Arkansas, the biggest of which is Norfolk National Fish Hatchery. We also have the Greers Ferry National Fish Hatchery and Mammoth Springs. And so those are really, really important to us altogether. Under normal circumstances, our hatcheries, between the 2 of them, provide about 40% of the numbers stocked, and the federal hatcheries are providing about 53% of the numbers stocked in Arkansas. So we really depend on them. And really, that's kind of misleading because our hatcheries depend completely on getting fish from the federal hatcheries, either as eggs or as fingerlings, to grow out. So the Fish and Wildlife Service hatcheries are really important to us.
Mm-hmm. And you're producing rainbow trout, brown trout, brook trout, and cutthroat trout. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm. In 2020, we also started kind of intermittently stocking tiger trout as well. So,
okay. What species of cutthroat is it? Do you know?
They varied over the years. Normally what we're stocking is the Snake River strain of cutthroat, but they've also stocked, we had a Trout Unlimited partnership where they did some egg box planting and fingerling stockings of Bonneville cutthroat trout. We've also they've done some other attempts at doing Yellowstone cutthroats, which were a complete failure. Nobody should ever stock Yellowstone in a tailwater, just FYI. And at least not down here.
Why is that?
They did terrible. I don't know. They did terrible in the hatchery, and they did even worse when they got stocked in the river. We stocked them, and we never hardly saw them again. So.
Yet they're an invasive species in some places out west.
That's what I hear, but they were not suited for our tailwater environment for whatever reason.
It's funny. Fish always behave badly when you want them to behave well, and they're
yeah. But primarily it's the Snake River strain that we have.
So these hatcheries are producing these fish. you say, so the Arkansas, the state hatcheries, they're just grow out facilities then. You get either eggs, well, I guess you can get eggs and hatch, or you get larvae, and you grow those out to usually catchable size most of the time.
Yeah, so catchable size here is 11 to 12 inches. The federal hatcheries are raising theirs to 11 inches, and then our hatchery raises fish to a 12-inch average size.
So these fisheries, I mean, obviously there's some natural reproduction, as we've talked about with Dr. Steve Lockman, the little red, and there's some other species that occasionally spawn in the rivers, but really to withstand the fishing pressure, because there's a lot of fishing pressure on these streams, you really have to do that by stocking catchable sized trout. I guess that's what supports the majority of the harvest fishing. There are trophy fish out there as well that are more protected, but you really need to put harvest-sized trout out there as a put and take or a put and grow take fishery. So what happened this summer that threw a wrench into that?
Well, so yeah, and I've explained this to several people since this all started, is that my worst nightmare as the trout biologist is to have one of my major drought facilities have an issue and have to try to figure out what to do from a management and regulation standpoint. But this year we've been faced with two major catastrophes at two different hatcheries, which happen to be the two highest producing numbers wise. So it's been an issue, but this actually really all started back in the spring. Our Spring River State Fish Hatchery experienced a record flood, and we lost about 50% of the fish that we had on our facility. And so starting with that, we were already down quite a bit in the numbers we were stocking in some of our fisheries, and we had to move a bunch of fish around to try to reduce the overall losses at some of the places. And so that hatchery has been operating at 50% capacity since April. We'll enter into late summer, early fall within the last couple months. In all that flood water that we got back in the spring filled up our major reservoirs, including Norfolk Lake. And it's led to a situation now with just really terrible water quality in Norfolk Lake, which is the water supply for the Norfolk National Fish Hatchery. So starting probably late August, early September, their water quality started getting really bad. Dissolved oxygen was bad, is bad in the lake still, but really that anoxic environment has created issues with hydrogen sulfide. Plus, they've been having issues with really warm water temperatures, getting up in the mid to high 60s, which in a trout hatchery is terrible, terrible conditions with the crowding. They had issues with water quality last fall and had lost over 1 million fish last fall. And they didn't miss any issues with stocking this year, but then turn around and the water quality was even worse this fall. And they've also lost another 1 million plus fish this fall. And at one point in time, they were losing tens of thousands of fish a day, which is incredible loss to where they're probably down to maybe having about 10% numbers wise of what they would normally have on their station. Between the two issues this year, we're at a significant loss of the numbers that we have to normally stock.
So for the Spring River hatchery, you say it was the flood event caused the water quality problem. So I'm guessing turbidity, anoxia. What are we looking at? What caused the fish to actually die?
Yeah, I think it's just all that organic matter that washes into the lake, sink into the bottom of Norfolk Lake and decomposes and creates that anoxic environment. And then, of course, that is the level of water that the hatchery pulls from its intakes into the hatchery. So and we have fall water quality issues every year. It's just the typical thing that happens in these southeast reservoirs, that they stratify and that lower level is low on oxygen. But this year was worse, and last year was bad, and this year was worse. And so it's just been a real problem for the hatchery.
Yeah. And a lot of my listeners aren't fish biologists, so I guess we could talk about where you're pulling the water from. I mean, lakes in the summertime in the South stratify. So you get warm water at the surface and the cold water stays down deep. But the problem with it being down deep is it's not mixing with the upper layers, which have the oxygen in them. And then you add in all that organic matter that's breaking down oxygen, and potentially the anoxic environment is releasing bad things like hydrogen sulfide into the water that builds up in those deeper areas. So if you're pulling water from that very deep, very cold region that has no oxygen and potentially dangerous compounds dissolved in the water and bringing it down into a hatchery, I guess when the water comes out and it's no longer under pressure and it's exposed to air, then you could have all kinds of things happen, like off-gassing, and the hydrogen sulfide can come out of solution. Just lots of bad things can happen in that situation, right?
Yeah. The folks that are fish health people have talked about this and have said that if you can smell the hydrogen sulfide, it is toxic to fish. And right now, or it's gotten better the last couple of weeks, but about a month ago, if you were within a mile of the river, you could smell that rotten egg sulfur smell, indicating those high levels of hydrogen sulfide gases being released. And so we don't know the exact mechanism of what killed the trout, but it's most likely it's going to be that hydrogen sulfide. We've sent some fish off for testing at a private lab out in Northwest, out in Washington State. Hopefully get those results soon that says exactly what is the mechanism of what killed the fish.
Yeah.
We don't know yet, but we can suspect. And it's probably a lot of combination factors. It's the sulfide, it's the low oxygen, it's the warm water temperatures, and in the hatchery environment, that leads to stress and parasites, and it's just a whole combination of things.
The same water's going into the rivers. Did it cause problems in the river, or were they at low enough density that it didn't cause as many issues?
Yeah, we've heard of some fish that have died. Well, people have seen dead fish in Norfolk tailwater, but the hatchery outlets from Norfolk Hatchery discharge into Dry Run Creek, which is a youth fishery adjacent to the hatchery, which then dumps directly into Norfolk tailwater. And so people have seen some dead fish, but I don't know that it was because they died from water quality in the river or they were fish that floated downstream from the hatchery. What tells me that it was most likely hatchery fish is I haven't heard any reports of big quality rainbows that have been in there for a while. I didn't hear of any other species dying, so I would think that if it was a major fish kill in the river, it wouldn't have been selective of those stalker rainbows, which is all I've heard reported as dead.
Okay. And for some reason, I think I heard that in Norfolk Lake, that there were fish kills in the lake. Were there stripers and stuff killed in that lake due to water quality too?
Yeah, back in either late August, I don't deal with the lakeside stuff much, but back in late August or early September, there was a big striper kill, and it was related to this same, those fish getting squeezed between that super warm water and the really low oxygen water, and they had a pretty significant striper kill on the lake too.
So it's not something that's just isolated with the trout.
No.
So now you've lost fish at one of your state hatcheries and one of your federal hatcheries, one of your biggest two hatcheries. The other hatcheries are okay?
Yeah, thankfully.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, we haven't had any issues at the other. And I mean, the next biggest facility that we rely on is Greers Ferry National Fish Hatchery, and they haven't had any, significant issues this fall. So, which is really good. But being down Spring River Hatchery and Norfolk Hatchery is really significant for us. I mean, they're stocking the majority of fish in the state between the two of them. So, obviously, when we lose fish, and we've had times in the past where we lost fish from one or other of those facilities, not to this extent. We had another hatchery flood at our Spring River Hatchery back in 2017, which cut numbers quite a bit. And we've had little issues here and there where one or the other was able to make up for the other one stocking wise, and you don't really miss anything when it comes to the numbers that get stocked. But having both of these have the significant issues is sort of panic mode a little bit.
Yeah, especially when the other hatcheries are going to have to pull the weight on the other systems, So instead of just Greer's Ferry fish going into the Little Red River, now they've got to be transported, which is stressful on fish as well. And you mentioned you've had these kills in the past. I mean, I think it was the aquaculturists always say you're not really an aquaculturalist if you haven't killed 1 million fish. Well, congratulations.
Yeah, they've I guess they've succeeded in that this year for sure.
Fish die. I mean, trout are a hard species to keep alive, especially in some place like Arkansas that's warm. And then if conditions are right, you can do it. And when conditions are bad, you're going to have some losses. But that means a lot fewer fish are being stocked into the systems. And because of that, you have to manage the rivers a lot differently. So I know that you just released some emergency harvest restrictions. Tell us what they are and what they're intended to do.
Yeah, so I guess it helps. And what I also should have pointed out, I mentioned earlier the federal hatcheries supply about 53% of the statewide numbers. But they're really important for several of our trout fisheries. At least this problem with Norfolk Hatchery is they stock about 50% of what we put in the White River each year, which is our biggest, most popular fishery in the state by far. But they supply 100% of the numbers for two of our other big fisheries, which are Norfolk tailwater and beaver tailwater. So if we don't have Norfolk tailwater or Norfolk hatchery to be able to stock those locations, we then have to look at pulling fish from other fisheries to help compensate for the losses at those tailwaters. So really this issue has caused a lot of trying to figure out how to shuffle things around and move fish from other facilities or other trout waters. And so again, not having Norfolk to supply the fish is a major issue. But so when this happened, we went in knowing how heavily pressured these fisheries are and how much fish get harvested from. We do creel surveys on each of these major tailwaters every 5 years. So we have pretty current information on harvest and harvest rates and angling pressure. We knew that we were going to have to put a halt on what people are taking out or severely limit it, because we're not fully through this issue at Norfolk Hatchery yet. As of just a few days ago, they're still losing fish every day. And we don't know at what point in time their water quality turns around and gets back to normal. And until it does that, which we expected to be January before they're kind of back to being able to inventory what they have left, we just needed as an agency to kind of hit a pause in letting people take fish out and went in with these emergency trout fishing regs, which is unprecedented. We've never had to do that, but if ever there was a time, it was now.
So historically, I guess most of these systems, it was a 5 trout limit. Is that correct?
Yeah, the typical daily trout limit is 5 fish per day. And each tailwater kind of has its own unique combinations of what those can be, and some of them have minimum length limits on species like brown trout or cutthroat trout, but it's normally a 5 fish per day limit.
And so what are the new emergency regulations?
Yeah, so we went in, and what we ended up doing is making the upper half of the White River, so the upper 45 miles from Bull Shoals Dam all the way down to Norfolk confluence, where the Norfolk tailwater comes into the White, and all of Norfolk tailwater, catch and release only. Those two sections of river are super heavily pressured throughout the year, but they're also in the winter months where most people are spending their time fishing. And of course, we're talking about this issue really starting to take effect now through early December and lasting at least through the early spring. So those two parts of the river got made into catch and release only. And then other places on the lower White, Beaver tailwater, and the Little Red River, we reduced our daily limit from 5 fish per day down to 2 fish per day. And Beaver and Greer's Ferry also got maximum length limits, so nobody can remove a fish over 14 inches from those fisheries right now, which the reason we did the maximum length limit is if we're putting in fewer stocker size, which are the ones that people typically keep, then you tell them they can only keep 2 fish per day. If you don't have that maximum length limit, we're worried that they're going to then target those bigger, more quality sized fish as the ones they take home. And so we don't want to have them removing our quality fish while this situation is going on.
So the upper 45 miles of the White River are catch and release only now.
Yep.
Wow. How did anglers take that?
Honestly, they took it pretty good. There's been a few grumblings, of course. There are people that still have very much a mindset of I want to take my daily limit home and eat it. And shore lunches are a big thing for some of the guides up here. But really, the understanding from the public with what's going on right now has been pretty sympathetic to, okay, we understand why our agency had to take such extreme measures, which I'm pleasantly surprised because I really expected a whole lot of negativity, but the angling public's been really good, and some of the guides have been really good on Facebook about saying it's okay, like we can still catch fish. And that was the biggest thing for me moving into this situation was, I know there's people that want to harvest fish and take them home, but while this is going on, my most important thing was that they can still come here, they can still catch fish, enjoy their trip, and it's unfortunate that they can't harvest a few, but catching is more important than keeping right now, in my opinion. So that was kind of what we were faced with. And if they want to harvest fish, they can go to the lower part of the White and keep a couple fish and harvest them down there. It's only 20-minute drive from where they normally go. So
where does that start? Is that
Norfolk, Arkansas?
Okay.
Yeah, so about 45 miles below Bushell's Dam.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for listening to Fish University. Do you have a question or a topic for the podcast? If so, you can email me at wes, that's W-E-S, .neal, that's N-E-A-L, at Mississippi State, that's M-S-S-T-A-T-E, .edu. Or instead, please visit the Fish University Facebook page. On the Facebook page, you will find useful articles, videos, stories, and other information, as well as updates on upcoming podcasts. Not to mention, you can send me a private message with questions or suggestions. Just search Fish University and look for our colorful logo. And please follow the Fish University page. We need your support. Now back to the show. So I have to ask this question because, I've had Steve Lockman on here a bunch of times, and we talked about the Little Red River, and we talked about the brown trout, and the fact that the brown trout in the Little Red are a lot more abundant than what people realize. I think they're about half the catch when you go electrofish, and they're not growing like they used to because they're basically harder to catch. And the guides a lot of times don't want to keep brown trout. They want to keep the little stalker rainbows. So you almost have a brown trout crowding situation in the Little Red. Why limit harvest to brown trout?
Well, down on the Little Red, so we aren't really limiting, aside, we made the daily limit of 2 fish on the Little Red, which is on the Little Red, they can keep rainbows or brown trout. So they can still harvest a couple of small browns, and most people won't. There's just this mentality on the Little Red that 99% of people are never going to harvest a brown. Doesn't matter how many times in the past we told them there were too many browns out there. They're just not going to do it. They're wild. It's the only fishery in the state where the brown trout self-sustain themselves. So it actually is the least restrictive as far as this regulation goes, and the fact that they can even harvest small browns on the upper White River in Norfolk tailwater. They can't harvest any browns. They can't, and even on the lower section of the White where they can harvest rainbows, you can't harvest a brown unless it's over 24 inches. That's the minimum length limit. So we haven't seen the last several years nearly as many browns. There's been a shift away from what we would consider to be overpopulated on the Little Red. Our catch rates have really declined the last 4 or 5 years. But with that, we've seen an increase in the average size of browns on the little red, to where the majority of fish we're seeing now are 15, 16 inches plus. In the past, that population was dominated by 12 to 16 inch fish. So there's been sort of a shift in what we see down there. So, but the reason we had to do these protective regs on the little red and beaver tailwater is because neither one of those fisheries is going to be stocked as much as they normally are because of this hatchery situation. So we had to reduce just harvest in general because we're going to be putting less fish in those, because we're going to be moving fish from other fisheries to compensate for losses at some of the other places. So
why do you think the brown situation has changed on little red? Less recruitment? Has something changed? New species? Or is it the snakeheads? Tell me it's the snakeheads.
No, I'm not going to tell you it's the snakeheads. We do see snakeheads out there, but it's not a ton. I think, I don't know how many total. We just got through doing our annual sample of the little red a couple weeks ago, and maybe a handful of snakeheads the entire
Pretty cold
time.
for them.
But no, I don't know. Don't know the exact mechanism, what's going on. We certainly had a couple years where we didn't see nearly as many small browns. So whether, we've had some recent high water years, which isn't good for spawning, if that's affected the recruitment for a few years in a row. So we've seen this shift towards the bigger fish. I mean, we're not complaining in the sense that people want to see better quality browns. But I think this fall we picked up some more small fish again. So I think maybe we just had a couple of years in a row of bad recruitment, and that happens. It's a fish population.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, the public doesn't understand that you can't have a great banner year of recruitment every year. It's not good for the fishery. So,
has there been any discussion about bringing fish in, like buying fish from Missouri, or was it just not feasible economically?
Yeah, we actually did get approved to purchase some fish. The problem is you're not looking at replacing tens of thousands of fish. You're looking to replace 1 million plus fish.
Mm-hmm.
And our hatchery, we're 6-7 months out from that flood in April. Is what I'm talking about. We got approved is that for us, we're just within the last month are still looking to fill some of the size gaps that we lost at our hatchery back in April. And so now the federal hatchery is going to be challenged over the next 3 to 4 months to start figuring out where do they get fish from to start bringing in and replacing all the different sizes that they lost. Because, if y'all aren't fish people that are listening to this, recovery is not a quick thing. If you were to only be able to get eggs to replace what you lost, you're looking at 20 months to raise a trout from an egg all the way up to a stocker size fish here in Arkansas. And so we don't think that that's going to be how long it's going to take, because the hatchery ideally is going to be looking for a variety of sizes to bring in so that they have that stagger back in order over time so that they get back to a point where they can stock. And they still do have some fish on North Fork Hatchery right now, but they don't know how quickly they're going to be able to replace everything. So we really don't know how long this is going to be an issue. I mean, we're fully expecting that after this month that they don't and are not able to stock at all again until at least the summer and perhaps even longer.
Did the hatcheries lose their brood stock?
So our hatcheries here in Arkansas are not brood stock facilities. So they don't spawn their own fish. They get all of their egg supply from other federal hatcheries like Irwin in Tennessee, Ennis up in Montana. But they're not supplying their own eggs. They're getting their eggs from the other federal hatcheries.
So what are the big brood stock on display there for? Just for display?
Just for show. Yep.
Did they lose those big fish?
Some of them. They knew when this started to happen in late August. We went out, they called us and said, hey, we want to try to get some of these big fish out. So we went out to the hatchery and put pit tags in probably 30, 35 of those fish. And then they went ahead and took them out and stocked them in the river. We wanted to be able to, if somebody catches one of these giant rainbows out of the display fish, we want to be able to say that was one that we stocked. And so they got rid of some, but they also lost some.
So when we finish recording, you're going to send me GPS coordinates, right?
Yeah. Yep.
There were some big fish in those rivers beforehand, so I can't imagine finding a big naive broodstock that likes pellets and pellet-shaped flies.
Yeah, within a few days or a week or so of stocking those fish, there were definitely people on Facebook posting pictures of big, giant rainbows that they caught. Looked so rough, like they just came out of a raceway.
Yeah, no fins left, and
yeah. But yeah, no, these emergency trout regs are taking effect for 120 days, which puts us into about mid-February. And by that point in time, what we're hoping is that we have a much better idea of exactly how many fish were lost at Norfolk, kind of what their game plan is moving forward, how quickly they think they're going to be able to get back to stocking again. And our commission, Game and Fish has a board of commissioners, 7 of them, who ultimately make the decisions on whether or not we would extend this 120-day emergency period, or if we would rescind it or, modify it a little bit. But we're just going to have to get more information early in the year once Norfolk has a better idea of what's going on.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't know, maybe a decade ago or so, didn't you already reduce the number of fish that were stocked? I mean, you were stocking a lower number than you used to historically?
Yeah, so we've had multiple stocking reductions depending on what fishery it was. Some of them were intentional. Some of them were knowing people wanted to catch more quality size fish, trying to reduce the densities. The Little Red was one of those places. We have a ton of browns. We know they don't grow fast, so let's try to reduce the number of rainbows going in to try to improve growth rates of browns. It did not work on the Little Red. And we've had a couple of other fisheries where we've reduced the numbers for the same reason. But then we've also had big cuts because of issues with hatcheries. So the first big one was 2015 from our Spring River hatchery. We got IPN virus. And it's a fish virus, for folks who don't know, that affects, especially in a hatchery setting, the juvenile fish. It causes a lot of issues in that hatchery setting, not so much once they get stocked, but at that time, Spring River hatchery supplied about 40% of the fish for the Little Red. We didn't have to, but we discontinued stocking from Spring River into the Little Red because we did not want to take any chances that virus would have a negative effect on that wild spawning brown trout population. So that was about a 40% cut for that fishery. And then come around to 2017, the first time our hatchery had a big significant flood, we ended up having a lot of big cuts in the state of about 25% because our hatchery wasn't able to stock at a full amount when that flood happened. And it's just been one thing after another. But yeah, there's been a series of cuts, some on purpose, some were forced into, but we've always been able to adjust pretty well. But this year's a whole different situation.
So you said that the Spring River supplied about 40% of the trout to the Little Red River, even though the Greer's Ferry hatchery is on the Little Red River. Is that because it produced different species that the Greer's Ferry hatchery didn't produce? Or, I mean, it seems like that's a lot of travel for trout when there's trout right there nearby.
Yeah, well, at the time we were stocking somewhere around like 270,000 rainbow trout a year in the Little Red. And so when Spring River wasn't able to stock it anymore, now we're stocking. Greer's Ferry hatchery can fully supply what we need for the Little Red. Now the 40% cut was way too much. I don't think that it needed to be that high. I never would have recommended for that to be the full stocking cut on the Little Red. But we haven't gotten back to a point until this year. We hadn't got back to a point where we could bring fish from another facility again. Because what the Bruce Ferry hatchery stocks is the full amount that they can produce. They're producing the maximum amount that they can, which is about probably close to 200,000 fish a year. So if we want to bump numbers up to 220 or 230 in the Little Red, we're going to have to bring fish in from another location. We actually started to do that this year. We moved some fish from Norfolk Hatchery to the Little Red, but then when our hatchery flooded in spring, we had to move the extra new fish that we'd planned for the Little Red back to the White to cover what Spring River wasn't able to stock. And then this has happened. So this was the first year we were actually going to try to boost numbers back up in the Little Red from a rainbow standpoint. And it's just been a huge mess of the messiest of the messy stocking situation I can possibly imagine.
And as you said, it takes 20 months to grow from an egg to a stockable sized fish. So when you have a hatchery that's, hit like that, and you need to replace the different size classes, some of those size classes are going to take up to 20 months to grow up to catchable size fish. So even though you'll have some intermediate sizes that'll mature fast enough to stock out sooner, are we talking, potentially a year and a half to 2 years before things are back to quote unquote normal?
Yeah, I mean, as far as them having the full number of fish that they will have on site, I think it will take them a couple of years to fully recover back to having their pre-loss numbers, assuming they don't have another terrible water quality year. It'll take them a while to fully recover. I don't think it takes that long to get them back stocking again, but to fully get back to where they have all the fish on site they normally would, yeah, I think we're talking a long-term period of time.
So do you think that what'll happen after the 120-day period is a slow ratcheting of the regulations back? Maybe you move to 3 fish per day and 1 fish in the White River. Do you see it sort of like gradually recovering, or keeping these regulations in place until you're fully ready to go back to normal?
Well, I don't know. I really can't answer that question right now. I don't know. I feel like we just have to get Norfolk Hatchery to do a full inventory of what they lost, get together a game plan for when they can start bringing fish back in. And we're going to be right at the end of that 120-day period. And it's too early to say if we'll extend it another 120 days. Another factor to consider is that our hatchery is expected to get back to 100% stocking again by April. So the cuts overall to all of the fisheries collectively won't be as high once we can get back to stocking 100%. The other thing is that we took on a bunch of, I will call it rescuing some of Norfolk's fish, get them off of Norfolk Hatchery, and we actually hauled those over to our facility to keep them from dying at Norfolk Hatchery. So we actually have extra fish on our facility right now that could help compensate for some of Norfolk's loss as well. But we've still got to do all the figuring out of how many fish it is and what numbers look like. And so it's complicated. And so I don't know if we extend that 120 days or not. We'll just see in a couple months what it looks like.
Well, trout anglers are known to be very outspoken, very organized. And I'm very surprised you stayed in this position as long as you have. It usually burns people out pretty quick. So my question is they seem pretty supportive of the restrictions. What happens if they decide they really like the restrictions and they don't want you to take them off when the situation is resolved? They may say, no, keep it low harvest or catch and release only because we like catching fewer, bigger fish. Mm-hmm. How are you going to deal with that?
Well, I mean, that's something that we're going to run into. You're spot on with that. And we've already seen lots of comments online about this is what Game and Fish should be doing all the time. this should be the permanent regulations. Now, I don't see it as my job, and it's not my job to favor one particular style of fishing over other. I mean, we like to say a lot in Arkansas, there's no such thing as a typical trout angler, because we range from the highly conservative catch and release oriented anglers to the, folks that like to go out and harvest their catch and keep them. And I think it is my job to balance the interests of both of those groups. So if you look at going in with these massive, highly restrictive regulations on a permanent basis, how are you affecting those people that do want to catch and keep some fish? There's got to be a balance in there somewhere. And, the reality is this is outside of our normal regulation process. That you can't, I guess, I don't know what the commission could decide if they wanted to, that they just wanted to make this the permanent regulations. I don't think that that's the best thing for the fishery without fully considering all of the public input and what anglers expect from this fishery.
Yeah, I think you'd run into a lot of kickback eventually because, yes, you'd have higher quality fishing for the guides and their industry would be booming. But at the same time, a lot of the day anglers that just show up. I mean, I'll be honest. If I go trout fishing, I expect to take home trout.
Mm-hmm.
I don't do it often, but when I do it, I want to take home a limit of trout. I'd like to catch a couple big browns and release them, but I have no problem keeping a small brown because I understand population dynamics. And,
Right.
It's just like bass in a pond. You can have 100 bass in a pond that weigh a pound each, or you can have 10 bass in a pond that weigh 10 pounds each, but you're only going to have 100 pounds out there. If you got too many little brown trout, you're not going to have that 40-pounder grow like we used to. I can see where the guides look at it and say, hey, this is an opportunity to have high catch rates, quality fish, and not exhaust the resource, even though the resource is somewhat artificial and supported by the hatchery system. But it would mean that you guys would have less hatchery input. You'd have to grow fewer fish, stock fewer fish. I could see it being where you take some systems and convert them back to normal in some other systems or portions of systems and leave the stringent regulations on. I could see that happening.
Yeah. These regulations are so restrictive. I think it's important right now. We presented multiple options to our commission for them to choose from, ranging from, we could do nothing and see what happens. I think that's a bad idea, all the way up to the option that they chose, which was the most restrictive regulation we could have had. But I think that ultimately the long-term goal for the fishery would be some sort of middle ground of, protective and still providing for good catch rates and allowing people to harvest some fish. But yeah, there's a big push and a lot of talk out there that there's a change in the culture and not so many people that are willing to harvest. But our creel surveys say otherwise. There are people out there that want to keep fish and do keep fish. The majority of people on our rivers don't. If you look at party-wise, how many people are keeping fish, it ranges anywhere from like 60 to 80% of the parties on the White River release every single fish that they catch. But those 25 to 30% of parties that do keep fish keep a lot of fish. Especially in the winter months. If we continue to allow people to harvest at the rates that they normally harvest, and we're stocking at this reduced rate, they could harvest about 75% of what we stocked this winter. And if you want to maintain catch rates, we just couldn't allow them to continue to pull fish out.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned earlier that the brown trout size and in the Little Red River, the fact that they're finally growing again some. Well, a lot of times, where you find the biggest brown trout in those rivers oftentimes is 20 feet downstream of the trout dock where they clean the trout.
Mm-hmm.
Those you reduced stocking rainbow trout trying to get browns to grow bigger, and it didn't work, probably because brown trout are eating rainbow trout, little stocked naive rainbow trout, at least when the bigger ones were. So, I mean, you kind of run the gamut of, well, if we stop allowing harvest, then we stop feeding trout guts to our big brown trout, and occasionally someone will hook into a big brown trout. I don't know. It's an ecosystem, but it's a pretty unusual ecosystem that's kind of anthropogenically influenced in a lot of ways. So I don't know. I'm curious to see where it goes.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned trout eating trout. During the annual sample, we were also doing that in conjunction with another UAPB project, which is a diet study of what brown trout are eating on the Little Red. And they got a brown trout that had about a 14-inch rainbow sticking out of its mouth. So it's not even that they're eating small rainbow trout that get stocked. They're eating a nice sized rainbow if they have the opportunity. So, but there are a lot of anglers on our rivers that think maybe they don't like stocking in general, but they think that these big browns diet is a lot of these stocker rainbows. And so cutting the rainbow numbers is going to affect their big browns. So, yeah.
And didn't you introduce some new potential prey species into the system recently, a sculpin or something? Or was that the angler?
We Game and Fish did not introduce them. And actually, sculpin are native and have been in most of the tailwaters in the White River system for a long time. But back in about 2007 or 8, we suspect some angler bait bucket introduced sculpin to the Little Red River. So that's part of this ongoing new diet study. Is we hadn't done a diet study since before sculpin were a thing down there, and now we're seeing, what percent of the diet of the brown trout do sculpin make up. And I think it's going to be significant some of the seasons. Now, certainly we've gone out in some seasons, and the majority what we found in the stomachs was bugs. But then some of the seasons that we've been out there was almost entirely sculpin. So they are using the sculpin. Whether within the last 5 or 6 years since Dr. Lockman started his projects, we've seen more and more sculpin every year since 2007, are they starting to use those fish, and is that going to help out with growth rates? And we don't know, but this is going to be an interesting project to find out.
I think we've covered most everything. You think there's anything else you want to bring up?
I would say, if anybody's watching this, which is contemplating whether or not they should cancel a trip to Arkansas, my advice is don't. You're still going to be able to come. They're still going to be able to come. They're still going to be able to catch fish. They're not going to be able to keep fish in some of these places, but the fishing experience is still going to be good. Generally, we've done surveys of our trout permit holders here in Arkansas. And what's most important to folks is that they go out and have a good experience, and they enjoy being outdoors and spending time with family and friends, whereas taking fish home to eat is a low priority compared to that. So I would, and a lot of the resort owners are relaying that message to their people who call and say, well, should I cancel my trip? And they're like, no, you're still going to catch fish. You're still going to have a good time. And that's what I want people to know about this current situation. Like, we're going to be okay. We're going to recover. Fisheries in Arkansas are still going to be great. And we're going to get back on our feet soon.
Christy, thanks for coming on and explaining the situation to us. I hope the listeners have learned a lot about what's going on there, and hopefully they're not canceling their trips.
Yep, I hope so too, but I appreciate you having me today.
Absolutely. And thanks everybody for listening to Fish University. Catch us next episode.
Fish University is hosted by Wes Neal, an employee of Mississippi State University Extension Service and a faculty member in the Department of Wildlife, Fisheries, and Aquaculture. This podcast is part of the Natural Resources University network of podcasts. Funding was provided by the Renewable Resources Extension Act. If you have questions or suggestions, please go to the Extension website at extension.mississippistate.edu. Click on Natural Resources and then select the Fisheries tab in the drop-down menu. Or you can email me at wes neil@msstate.edu.